spooky month. And while Pokemon doesn't necessarily have any scary movies, I wanted to get the closest I could to a horror movie with Giratina the Sky Warrior. Let me tell you, there's some immense potential for some horror with the way Giratina moves. I never watched it before and was too excited to get started, so why don't we get started on my review and a bit of analysis of the events within the movie. Howdy there, I'm Krillic, and I'm still getting the office organized since the move. If you haven't seen the Q&A video, go check that out. I answered not only your questions, but some additional questions that people have asked me in the past, in addition to just a little bit of story about my life and how I kind of got to even this point. As time goes on, I am going to have this office gussied up, so my goal is that at least by the next video, things are hanging out behind me a little bit more and we don't have such a sterile environment. Then from there, I just kind of wait for another bookcase or so that way everything looks real snazzy, okay? Okay. But as far as the movie goes, I decided that I'm going to be a happy movie reviewer. I'm not going to be somebody who is overly critical, ripping things down constantly. I don't like that. I don't like being overly critical. I might have a comment here or there out of just the fun of it, but overall, we all need to understand this is a kid's movie. This is not intended for people probably over the age of 15 or 16, but with the subject matter within some of these movies, it could be understandable that somebody who's older can enjoy them. So that's where my focus kind of is. How do I find my enjoyment out of this? And how do we take what was in this movie and apply it to Pokemon as we know it in the more realistic sense? What opportunities are there for more horror, for more of the franchise to spread their wings and see what is possible overall? In the end, it just makes it more fun. So my plan is I'm going to go over the movie, give my opinions as we go through. You'll get some shots and reactions here and there from me, and we'll talk about some of the stuff that happens that, again, really opens up the door for some opportunities within the world of Pokemon. Right off the bat, there are so many Pokemon together that it goes against a lot of the Pokédex entries and even some of the research that I've been doing recently in regards to what Pokemon get along, which ones don't, and how they may or may not eat or interact within their ecosystem. The beginning really is just a proper introduction to the world of Pokemon, so that way fresh viewers can actually understand what's happening, what the world is like, and even see that Pokemon battles exist, which make me question big time, how do people actually survive Pokemon battles? Is it really possible, considering the explosions that happen in the movie even, let alone in every other battle that exists in the world? I swear there has to be craters at every single point, every single turn of a route with the way that things go. Early on, we not only get introduced almost immediately to Shaymin, we also get introduced to Dialga, the Pokemon that governs over time. And I wasn't ready to see it happen. You would think an all-powerful deity wouldn't need to, but it drinks from the water only to be grabbed by Giratina as if it was a crocodile waiting for a deer, an antelope, something to come near, and twists it, pulling it into the rift, dragging it into the Distortion world. And we see this fight between them as Shaymin also gets sucked in, helpless to the world around it. And I have to admit, the body horror of Giratina in its origin form is amazing. I also love the scaling shot of it, because when we look at Shaymin, Shaymin is tiny as it lands on one of the Pokemon when they are battling. Minuscule. And the scaling of that really puts into place just how large and powerful they can be. And I'll say right now, they're not always that powerful, or rather, they're not always that large. It feels like either they scale themselves up or down, unless it was a mistake by the animators, which I would like to put my faith and say that it isn't, and that these all-powerful deities can actually change their size. It makes sense for Giratina. It's a being of the Distortion world where gravity is constantly changing, so even, maybe that has some sort of factor on it. But Shaymin starts to absorb all of the gas in the area, all this dark, noxious-looking fumes, until it eventually explodes, opening a hole for Dialga to escape. Giratina tries to follow, only for it to be sent back over and over again through what they call an infinite time loop, preventing Giratina from using its natural ability to enter and exit the Distortion world at will, forcing it to stay in this reverse world overall. We get introduced to the crew, Ash and the gang, where we have Dawn and Brock, and it's great, it's fun. I have a little bit of fun just seeing all the different Pokemon together. They're eating, it's a very cute scene. Just the massive Pokemon that are there. I can't imagine what the cost of food would be. Luckily, Brock has the ability or has the knowledge to actually create that food. It isn't long before Shaymin, also exiting from the rift that it ended up opening itself through its sheer power, ends up landing nearby, goes through the brush, and eats the pancakes while no one else is looking. This ends up in a big commotion between everybody, and it ends up bursting again. It primarily burst because it was afraid. It was surrounded, and honestly, I get it. If you're surrounded by God knows how many different Pokemon, some of them being poison types, some of them being flying types, you know naturally that you're, more susceptible to their attacks, and then you have 3 humans surrounding you as well. I'd be terrified also. And once everybody calms down, after Dawn intrudes and puts, tells everyone, hey, you need to calm down. You can't be acting this way. That's when Shaymin talks. And Shaymin isn't making much sense. They're looking at Shaymin. Ash is trying to talk to them, be like, hey, where'd you come from? Over there. Well, where's over there? Over there. Well, where's over there? Over there. Oh my God, where is over there? And it turns out that Shaymin's running a fever and is actually delusional right now, so they have to take Shaymin to the Poke Center, who, for some reason, the Poke Center knows exactly what Shaymin is right off the bat. I guess it's because it's a mythical Pokemon, which is, later revealed. There are, we know that there are multiple Shaymin, but at the time of all this, we did not know that there was more than one Shaymin. I would have laughed, though, if at some point during all of this, because Brock did say, oh, it's a Pokemon, then I would have laughed if he looks at the Shaymin and goes, I don't know what that is. That looks like, that doesn't look like a Pokemon to me. Just completely throw it out the window. It's not a Pokemon. I have no idea what this is. Clearly, it should have been in the Pokédex. All the Pokemon are discovered, guys. I mean, come on. The professors, they're all-knowing deities of the Pokemon world. They know what exists and doesn't. Like, come on. Nevertheless, of course, we get a Nurse Joy that is wearing glasses. Brock puts on his own glasses and goes full simp for her, which is goofy. And up until Krogunk decides to just poison jab and drag him away before he can do too much damage. Shaymin does continue talking, asking where it is. It's very confused still, very thrown around. And then Dawn produces a Poffin to Shaymin, which I expected Poffins to be so much larger. I guess you don't have to make them large, and it makes sense that her partner Pokemon being Piplup, she would feed it plenty of Poffins for the Pokemon contests, for beauty, cool, cuteness, whatever, you know what I mean? And that would make sense. You don't want to make a massive Poffin for Piplup, although I'm sure Piplup eats plenty of food. It's explained that Seed Flare is the move that Shaymin is using when it purifies air, and then after absorbing that air, through its purification, lets out a large explosion of sorts, releasing the purified air and the energy within it. Now, the problem with this is that it was explained that there was a forest that was, I don't know, like super problematic, and while purifying it, it was noted that there was a Shaymin that used Seed Flare and basically destroyed the entire forest. It's a bit counterproductive, if I gotta say so myself. It's like, yes, the air here shall no longer be polluted by our hands. Anywho, gone. Just, wow. And of course, we get our nice little introduction to Team Rocket, who is peeking between the door and the door frame, listening in on the conversation and now plotting to capture Shaymin. Plenty of creepy music is playing during all this, although that might just be my personal opinion. I'm not going to play the music here because copyright's kind of going to be a problem for me to navigate with reviewing these movies, because they're Pokemon Company, rightfully so, a little bit more strict when it comes to these types of things. Nevertheless, they enact Operation Swipe Shaymin. Wobbuffet enters for like the only time that it's here for the entire movie, now that I think about it. And we move on. Really, Team Rocket in this movie, I'm going to tell you now, don't expect a lot from them. They have a few funny pun moments, and that's really it. They are, by all means, despite being villains, quote unquote, they're really not. And I think most people recognize that. They just are the weirdest, lovely, lovable grunts that have ever existed in history. And when there's an actual threat that is stronger than them, doing more evil than them, they always end up becoming like third rung, not just in terms of like how often do they appear, but rather they stop being evil. But we'll get back to that later. Shaymin has its flowers blossom for one reason or another, and we immediately get a shot of Giratina turning around while in the reverse world and starting to fly a different direction, as if it can detect Shaymin's presence. And as they are walking out of the Pokemon Center through the town, there are these like crystalline mirror statues that are around that are just kind of, I don't know, you can kind of see them in parks here and there in real life, where it's like, oh yes, modern art, how wonderful. And I don't know, it's I don't know, I've never found any interest in anything like that, but in this movie, they serve a very interesting purpose, because as the gang are walking through, we see Giratina flying through them, through the reflection itself. And it is one of the coolest things I have seen a Pokemon do. That is some horror. And that is where it kind of begins in my head, where I start thinking about what could be done with Giratina. Mirrors, water, glass in general. There is no escape from Giratina. It goes through any reflection. And we see that exemplified as Team Rocket manages to swipe Shaymin, and then immediately a rift opens up and just this Dragon Twister blasts through, picks up Team Rocket, and pulls them in. I believe they pull in Shaymin as well, and then the gang jumps in right after to try and save them, Rocket getting left behind. And while in the world, they talk about everything feeling weird, gravity is off, they feel lighter, and the second they start seeing Giratina flying around like a serpent, and like this very Eastern dragon style monster, really, within this strange world where there are islands of structures floating around, not just, you know, normally, but upside down, sideways, everything. Piplup and Pikachu try to attack it, only for Giratina to completely phase out of reality to dodge Pikachu's attack and then not be affected by Piplup's attack in the slightest, really exemplifying the power that this Pokemon has. Running in, we meet Newton Graceland, who tells the gang, hey, do not make Giratina angry. It's a bad idea. You need to run, and we need to go this way. Follow me. Now, I am going to obviously talk about what Newton Graceland does throughout this movie, but this is a perfect chance for me to go ahead and say, hey, if you haven't watched my video explaining every single Pokemon professor, go watch that after this. I explained every single Pokemon professor. Movies, shows, one time that they appear, even like amusement park ones that have like basically no background. There are so many, there are over 100. It is insane. And I might as well say, if you're enjoying this so far, please become a member. It does support the channel and other projects that I do all the time in order to create quality content for you. And if you want to get something out of it, new merch just arrived on the Teespring. I keep it nice and low cost. I get a nice little maybe $3 profit off of it, because I wouldn't want to buy something that's overly expensive, so why should you? But back to the main subject matter at hand. Newton Graceland then begins to teach us about the Distortion world, also named the Reverse world, as it exists as a parallel to ours, never mixing though. And Giratina is the only Pokemon with the ability to enter and exit it at will, in addition to being the only Pokemon that actually lives within the Reverse world itself. We get a cut towards Team Rocket with another great horror concept of them hiding away within buildings as Giratina is flying between them like this giant monster just searching for its next prey. Back to Graceland though, he does state that he has been here for 5 years, losing track of time from when he first entered to now, as he does have like ripped clothing, and you know, he seems to be in fine shape otherwise, but his clothing again is just very ripped, whether it's the arm sleeves or the legs. And as he's continuing to explain the world, they come across this same poisonous miasma, and that's actually what it is. It's this poisonous dark cloud that starts to slowly get near Piplup and Pikachu, and he flat out states, do not breathe it in. One breath of that gas can kill you. And so Pikachu wafts it away before Piplup can truly breathe it and, you know, bite the big one. After Piplup is saved, they continue to explain what happened to create these miasmas, or these clouds. I keep going back and forth between them, and I don't know why. But he explains that when time and space met, they collided in a way that they never should have. The forces of them forcing that collision. That then produced these clouds. Ash and Dawn then state that they know exactly when this happened, and that was back in Alamos Town, where Dialga and Palkia collided, fighting against each other. This toxicity is then produced from their collision, and Giratina knows this, becoming enraged, wanting them to stop, and its mindset goes towards, I can make them stop by basically killing them. And so that's why it tried to capture Dialga. It wants the destruction of its home to stop. And that's because Giratina understands the destruction of its home means the destruction of the real world, because they are so tied together. But unfortunately for Giratina, and fortunately for Dialga, and probably us, because I don't want to think of what would happen if the deity of time actually were to die. But Shaymin ended up interrupting the process and saved Dialga by accident. Dialga then traps Giratina, as we saw, and Giratina is now enraged at Shaymin. They also come across these bubbles that are floating around, and when Ash ended up touching one, thinking that he could exit through it to reach Brock, it actually causes a sort of like implosion, explosion in the air that ends up almost hurting Brock and sends him flying away just a little bit. And Newton reveals once again that the differences and changes, any sort of destruction that happens in this world affects the real world. That is why this place is so important. And they're not small differences either. The changes are dramatic. I mean, just the popping of a bubble caused that miniature explosion. Imagine what would happen if islands started getting destroyed, crystals were to get destroyed. It would cause cataclysmic mayhem. And while everything is being explained, we see Shaymin get nabbed by Giratina once again. And while everyone's freaking out, Shaymin actually comes out from under Ash's hat, and it's revealed that Giratina caught a substitute. And honestly, Shaymin's kind of a jerk. And I mean, Shaymin, very bossy, very self-centered. It's kind of the really good example of somebody that is young and afraid, so they hide their fear behind an extreme amount of bravado and trying to like pretend to be brave and that nothing bothers them, and just that's basically what Shaymin does most of this movie. So Shaymin comes off as a jerk, especially to Ash. Meanwhile, Dawn kind of placates to Shaymin, and Shaymin treats her a little bit nicer, is a little bit friendlier to her. Otherwise, Shaymin, again, really mean. Newton helps him find like this rift, like little miniature rift portal that appears randomly throughout the world and is occasionally found, and helps the gang get out. He then tells the gang as they're leaving, Giratina can see you through mirrors. Stay away from them. And that, again, just reinforces horror, and I love that so much. Team Rocket starts running in. They're like, oh, we gotta go, we hate being here. And as they're trying to escape, Jessie jumps off, and if it weren't for Newton Graceland catching her by the ankle, Jessie would have fallen to God knows where and probably died. And I keep saying died. I know. I keep saying kill or die or whatever else. But this movie very, very quickly and basically directly has shown that the consequences of failing in this movie will result in death. And that's so weird for a Pokemon like movie or Pokemon product in general. And if you don't think like, oh, they're not gonna die, I'm gonna tell you right now, there's stuff that happens later on that you cannot deny that death was a potential and was intended as a consequence of an action. Also, there's a point where, like, I forget who at this point, but someone says yappin', and I felt everything fall apart within my soul. The Zoomers were already here. We start to meet Zero, who appears with a ton of Magnemite, Magneton, and a Magnezone, which I laughed at every single time it spoke, because normally, if it didn't have a filter, it would sound like Magnezone, but then you get like a warble effect, and so you have Magnezone. I loved it. The way it sounded was so much fun, it made me giggle every single time. But what didn't make me giggle was the way that they just swarmed in, the sheer number of all of them together. I never thought I'd be afraid of that Pokemon. But you stop and you think and you realize when Pokemon ally or forced to ally under a more malevolent trainer, especially in those numbers, it gets scary. I mean, they're just like real life animals where you can train them to do certain things, and if you want to train them to do bad things, you can. You shouldn't. It's a horrible thing to do, but it happens within the world of Pokemon. Now, with all the antics and running, the gang eventually does get to escape and get onto a train. It's shown, like I said earlier, that Shaymin ends up liking Dawn more than Ash. Ash is consistently trying to tell Shaymin to screw off, essentially. And like, dude, why are you so mean to me? There's no reason for it, which I personally appreciate. There's something about the Pokemon movies where, yeah, they have like the goofy anime feel to it all, as you would expect, but outside of that, they still try to make it so that way the way that lines are delivered are still like a little bit more natural feeling in terms of reactions, and Ash not really having that filter of, oh, I'm just gonna continue being nice to this one thing that is continually mean to me. Whereas, like, Dawn, I can understand because Shaymin's not really mean to Dawn, so Dawn keeps treating it nicely, coddling it, and also Dawn has been around Ash enough that she probably enjoys the fact that Shaymin is being a little bit mean to Ash, just as a tease, of course. At least Dawn liking the fact that it could be teasing Ash, or just being a little bit mean to Ash, who has done a lot of stuff, both good and bad. So it's just like, it's some level of catharsis for her, probably. Meanwhile, Brock doesn't really care. He's in the background for so much of this movie and helps here and there with information, but he really plays a backseat role, which is fine. Though they don't really know where the destination of this train is, and when Ash walks out after Dawn, who he then finds sitting with a group of people surrounding her and the Shaymin in a good way, kids, adults, and everything, and they teach everyone about the flower garden. Basically, it's a flower garden that blooms because of Shaymin, and it has Gracidea flowers, which I always thought was Gracidea. Either way, Gracidea flowers that bloom, and when they do, they actually allow Shaymin to change and to fly away. We then cut back to Team Rocket, who, as I kind of said earlier, are taking their third rung role, no longer being really evil, but instead just taking orders from Newton Graceland and helping him gather supplies, even with a little bit of a snarky attitude from Meowth. I didn't do that right. After that brief cutaway, we get back to the gang, where we start to see Giratina reflected in the windows of the train. And it's not attacking, it's just watching. For whatever reason, it's just watching. And it turns out that the people that they were talking to ended up having some of the Gracidea flowers that Shaymin then smells as it then transforms into its sky form. Very reindeer-like and everything, allowing it to start flying around. Which, realistically speaking, the flowers are very reminiscent of like the flowers you'd see around the holidays. Not just like the way Shaymin might move its legs or has the horns. Not exactly like a reindeer, but still has those horns nevertheless. So there's definitely got to be some inspiration there. And I'm not going to talk about Shaymin in excess, just like I'm not going to talk about Giratina in excess here in regards to like their background and story and all that. Instead, I find it more fitting that I would talk about them in their own videos, whether it's for a full list of mythical Pokemon, a full list of legendaries, how all of the Pokemon are related in like the tree of it all. That's gonna be an effort and a half. Nevertheless, Shaymin is flying around, very happy, and the people on the train tell the gang, hey, this is where the flower garden is, if this is where you're going. And the whole reason Shaymin's been very scared and been like the, you know, kind of this jerk to Ash is because Shaymin has finally revealed that it is afraid. I also say it because I don't think they ever state whether this Shaymin is a he or a she, so I apologize for saying it so many times, but nevertheless, it, them. And reveals that they don't want to be left behind. They're scared. If they don't get to the flower garden in time, it's not that Shaymin will die. It's not that, you know, something bad will happen to anybody else. It's that Shaymin will get left behind. And yes, they'll lose their family. And it doesn't want to go through that. But now Shaymin, in their sky form, thinks that everything is fine. And they can take on Giratina. And it isn't long before the window crashes open and these swarms of Magnemite lines start to rush their way in. A fight ensues, and all three of them, we have an electric type, a water type, and a grass flying type. None of them have moves that are even generally effective on these Magnemites, but they manage it, and you know what, I'll give props to the use of Whirlpool, as that does trap Magnemites, as we've seen before. Really, you know, it's fun. Together, they defeat the swarm, and I have to admit, I enjoy the flying Foley that does happen. And of course, we see Magnezone again, which I love. I haven't mentioned it, if you, like, I love the Magnemite line. I always call mine Maggie. Really simple, basic name, but nevertheless, I do love that line. So it's fun to see them get so much love here and have that, like, starlight, spotlight available to them to just exist, especially in such large numbers. We get back to Zero, who looks at everything and doesn't seem to be very concerned about it all. Also, he has this, like, virtual waifu that greets him everywhere on his ship. Like, designed to be a full person, and when he walks through one of the doorways, there's like 6 of her total, 3 on either side. Like, this is some Cortana stuff, but at the same time, he is surrounded by her. So it's a little self-obsessy, and he later states how, you know, he wants to be in the Distortion world because he gets to be alone, nobody bothers him, you know, and he gets to live in this pristine world that he loves. But, like, are you sure, buddy? Are you sure you're not just lonely and moody? Are you sure? You know, maybe you do have human qualities instead of just being an edgy edgelord? I don't know, man. As we cut back to the gang, they're now on a boat, traveling on their way towards the glacier lands, where in the center of them, they are supposed to be able to find the flower garden. Kind of like a secret, sacred grove of sorts. We get to see some water Pokemon. The string loosens after it was tightened after the event of the stress of it all. And it's a fun little scene. We get to see Shaymin flying around. Piplup tries to fly, lands in the water, and then learns to swim a little bit better, zooming in and out of the water and through the water. And then even Ash is like, hey, do you want to fly? You're going to fly with them too, Pikachu? And sends out his Staravia, so that way the 3 of them can quote-unquote fly together in a very cute scene. Wasn't ready to see the 3D Swablu and Altaria, but you can't have everything hand-drawn. They were saving budget for some of the fights and some of the other stuff that was supposed to happen later. Which, we get a nice looming threat of the fortress that Zero commands above them, who is shown to be watching like a video that Zero recorded while he and Newton Graceland were in the reverse world together. And he drops the camera and runs over to Graceland's side when he's injured. And it is fully revealed that not just by voice, but by visual representation, that it is Zero, who was a pupil of Newton Graceland. And as I kind of expected, the portal opens up in the water from Giratina, who was in the reflection for a moment, and he sucks everybody back into the reverse world. Though, not only do they run in, but we also see Zero kind of flying on this like scooter, hover, car kind of thing going on, who looks at his Magnemite and go, "It's time for us to go in." And just flies right on in. Which, that brings me to a really good question. How does gravity affect birds? Like, they have hollow bones, so a stronger gravity could very well just completely destroy them. And there's no real wind, so you have to consistently be flapping if it's normal gravity, let alone a stronger gravity. I mean, we don't need to worry about the logic too much with it all, but it's just something I wanted to bring up and just let that be a discussion point below. Of course, Shaymin, in its sky form, had stated, "Oh, I could take on Giratina." So he challenges Giratina without a second thought and gets blasted right out of the sky. And we start to see, like, the gang tries to help and assist, that way Shaymin doesn't, fall into nothingness. But as Shaymin's flying around, we get shot of the real world, time passing faster than normal, which would explain why, Graceland didn't realize 5 years had passed until the sun sets. And then it cuts back to Shaymin, who then transforms back to their normal form because they cannot sustain their form after sunset. Which makes sense. Flowers bloom when the sun rises. Flowers close to conserve energy and to conserve heat when the sun sets. It makes sense. And it kind of lands on Ash. In doing so, they start running. And Ash asks, "Why do you keep staying on my head if you're going to keep complaining about how I run, how bumpy of a ride it is?" And Shaymin flat out says, "Well, if it eats me, it at least is going to eat you too." Like, oh my gosh. There is zero chill with Shaymin here in jabbing at Ash. Newton reappears, and we get some more fun gravity stuff. Things turning upside down as they walk, them walking around the screen. Just fun little things. Up until we get a nice little line from Zero, who states, "A beautiful, quiet, unspoiled world where no one can bother me." Again, we have this very emo boy who just very smart, but very misguided. We get to see more of Team Rocket actually working under Graceland, and how Shaymin tries to get Meowth to give it food, even though Meowth is holding water, and Meowth tells it to buzz off before Shaymin ends up getting nabbed by some Magnemite, and everyone else basically ends up getting captured. Meanwhile, Team Rocket just kind of sits this one out, as they say, or rather hides this one out, as they also say. Zero and Graceland end up meeting again, and they argue about how the two worlds are reliant on each other, and Zero is not unaware of this. He understands that the Distortion or reverse world is incredibly important in how it affects the real world. And in the most direct move of trying to kill someone ever, Zero has the Magnemite in their swarm work together to create a wind tunnel to push the gas over the gang, the Ash and the gang, actively trying to kill them. Up until Shaymin decides that it would absorb that gas, which goes exactly to Zero's plan. You see, Zero's been watching the whole time, as has been revealed throughout the movie, and knows that Shaymin's seed flare, with enough power, will end up ripping open another rift and allow Giratina to escape into the real world. And of course, with a big enough seed flare, that's exactly what happens. A massive seed flare with a massive rift. Everyone gets sucked out. Zero goes through. Giratina escapes. But here's the interesting thing. Giratina works to get rid of the Magnemite that are in its world before it escapes. And due to the gravity of our world, Giratina transforms out of the origin form. With Shaymin's assistance, and Giratina even knew it itself,
it had truly escaped from the time loop, because it was never escaping from the world, it was only attacking from within the world while opening the portals. And now it's free. At least until Zero calls in his Sky Fortress and captures Giratina. He begins scanning Giratina, and Newton Graceland reveals that he had actually been the one to initially design and create, not fully build it, but at least design this structure, this Sky Fortress of sorts, or rather, the device being used to capture and scan Giratina. The purpose was for them to be able to harness the powers of Giratina and transfer themselves between the two worlds of reality. The problem with this is, in doing this, they're not just scanning, they are fully absorbing and actually taking the life of Giratina in the process. And so, Graceland decides he would delete the project and shut it down. But Zero, in turn, was against this, and remembered the steps, being a part of the process from beginning to end, that it took to recreate this entire machine and enact his plan. Graceland, Ash, and Dawn move to try and save Giratina, and Brock starts to realize something. There's glaciers all around, they're in a grassy area, and he realizes they are in the flower garden as Shaymin transforms into its sky form and joins the battle. This ultimately ends up leaving Brock behind, and even he recognizes, oh, I'm starting to notice a pattern. The fun battle ensues, lots of, sky movement, so on and so forth, the twisting of the camera, fighting against Magnemite. We still haven't changed the fact that nobody's actually super effective against these things, but we're having fun here, don't worry about it. They realize they can't free Giratina from the outside, so they defend the outside as Graceland breaks through into the fortress itself alone with the help of his shield on and goes in. He ends up encountering Zero, who basically goes, yeah, sure, have fun, you can't do anything, bye, and walks away, basically leaving him there, only for Graceland to go, you seem to forget, or rather he seems to have forgotten, I'm the one who made this initially. I know the ins and outs, and his backpack releases 2 robotic arms, actually more, I think, as not only do the robotic arms start tapping away at the computer system, but he is also with his own hands tapping away, and there's just buttons everywhere as they're going through, and he's trying everything he can. The numbers are going up, the percentage of scan is at like 94, 95, 96%, until eventually he goes, how do you like this? And then stops the whole process, freeing Giratina. The problem with this, though, is we start to see not only the prison that Giratina is in start to fade out, but also what looks like the generators, the engines of this Sky Fortress begin to power down. And he confirms this as he runs out and tells the crew, hey, the only way I could actually stop this wasn't by stopping that part of the machine. I had to shut down everything. We need to go now. And they do. They fly off using the only way they got up there was because Zero left his roto scooter around, or whatever the heck you want to call it. And so they took advantage of that, leaving. Giratina kind of flops and then flops again, falling off into the water. The Sky Fortress continues to glide down, and being such a big, thick piece of metal, it grinds and crashes through the valley that they're in, ripping into it and displacing so many Pokemon in the rubble, and it is chaos. Eventually, Giratina crawls out of the water, just horribly defeated, horribly weak, and everybody is incredibly concerned because Giratina didn't seem to be breathing until eventually it starts to slowly breathe, but it is incredibly weak, that it might be too late, and Giratina is about to die unless somebody does something. Shaymin, in a turn face, decides to save Giratina using aromatherapy, healing it, bringing it back up, and everyone's celebrating, everybody's happy, woo, until Zero decides to pull a Frieza, emerges, and just immediately tries to blast everybody at once, just beyond angry that they were able to do what they did, and stop his original plan. So yeah, he tries to commit absolute mass murder. He tries to kill Giratina. He tries to kill Ash and the gang. There are tons of Pokemon surrounding them right now that are like there trying to help and be supportive. And he was ready to blast them all the way. Zero is a villain. And it is revealed that his like new machine flying thing has all the powers of Giratina, as it's not only using the same moves as Giratina, but also opens the rift and he flies into the reversed world. And once again, he knows that if he destroys stuff within that world, it causes problems in the real world, because he claims that he is just trying to save it, that the real world is hurting the reverse world, and that he is the true savior and guardian. Basically spitting in the face of Giratina, who is right there. And so he is destroying crystals and everything else, as it causes an explosion on the group, it causes explosion after explosion within the glaciers, and everything begins to shift and move. And then we get one of the coolest reveals, in my opinion, that I just was not ready for and super excited. So I'm just gonna insert that moment here. Oh! No freaking way! This is how Regigigas gets woken up? That's amazing! And so we enter the true final fight, the climax of the movie, as Ash, Giratina, they are assisting in fighting against this monster. And he just continues trying to destroy stuff. Meanwhile, in the real world, this glacier is moving and shifting and coming on down. And as it's doing so, it is projected to not only destroy the flower garden, but to also completely destroy the village ahead, as it has so much mass and so much incredible speed of movement. There is no real way of stopping it. So all the Pokemon that somehow know Ice Beam, who cares, are working together to blast off Ice Beam, wild Pokemon, trainer Pokemon, to freeze the lake and the water that's right there to slow it down. But it's not stopping. It's not stopping, and they don't know what to do. And they're defeated until they see off in the horizon Regigigas stand up. The man, the myth, the legend, the one that has towed continents, screams into the sky and goes, "The continents have moved because of me! Nothing will move without my permission!" And sends Mamoswine in a massive herd down the mountain, down the glacier, to work together and push back the glacier. And they're trying their hardest. Regigigas is right there, dead center, pushing against it, hands out, just really putting everything they can into it until it's just letting out just waves of energy. And as he pushes it back just even a little bit, we see in the reverse world, the crystals begin to form back, showing that if healing happens in the real world, it heals the reverse world. Ash ends up crashing on the ship during his part of the fight. Giratina ends up getting trapped, and as they're all sitting on the ship, Shaymin is still flying around. It's Ash and Pikachu, and Zero starts to fly them through the poison gas. Shaymin, of course, moves in to save them, absorbing the gas and then losing its transformation through the sheer effort of it all. Shaymin hatches a plan, running in, knowing that it has to not only save Ash, but could have the immense amount of power it needs to save the day if it absorbs that gas and releases another seed flare. So it does exactly that. Moving, absorbing the gas, purifying it, massive explosion, big rift, opening it up, and this rift is so strong, it starts to suck everybody out again. Team Rocket gets out, and the ship that Zero is manning is resisting it all, up until Giratina decides to not only grab the ship, but then full-on point-blank blast it, sending it out of the rift. Shaymin loses its form as it also flies through, and the ship goes through. Not only does the ship get blasted by all the ice of all the Pokemon, as Zero is inside still, all these systems shut down one by one as he is trapped, encased in ice within his ship. Shaymin then looks at the group and says, Ash and Pikachu are still in the reverse world. They didn't get out. Giratina is revealed to be carrying Ash and Pikachu safely and happily as it begins to go near one of the destroyed crystals, and circling around it begins to actually restore said crystal. And the restoration of it actually results in the glacier being pulled back to where it belongs and saving the day. They return to the normal world together, and everything seems like it's gonna have a happy ending, and Giratina flies off, and they assume that it's going after Dialga, but we don't see what happens after that. The gang gets back to the flower garden, in which we begin to see just so many. I was about to say hundreds, but not that many. But we see quite a few Shaymin running around and in the brush. Shaymin is happy, and for the first time, it's showing its gratitude, being the Pokemon of gratitude to Ash, let alone the rest of the group once more, as it cries and goes off on its own towards the rest of its family. They all transform, and they are very much like reindeer. There are 10? I have to look at my notes. How many were there? There's 10. There were 10 of them. There were 10 reindeer right there. Like, we are full, and they even form, you know, their line as if they were reindeer. So when the holidays roll around, I guess I'm talking about Shaymin, but that's like, you know, 2 months from now. So expect that. But they fly off, and we get the credits. Nice, you know, the song about, I don't know, I feel, what is it? It's like what was the guy who did Toy Story songs? I don't know. Either way, Randy Newman, where it was just like, you got a friend in me, you know, all these songs that it's just like very literal. But it's fine, you know, it's a nice, sweet song. We get some shots in there. Some of them is like Zero is actually saved from the ice, and instead of being a jerk, he does, you know, smile as Newton actually reaches his arm out to Zero, and they grab arms in unison, just showing that there is some camaraderie there, and that Zero might just turn a new leaf. We get Gracidia flowers, or Gracidia, whatever, I'm gonna call them Gracidia flowers. We get the Gracidia flowers sent back home to the families of Ash, Brock, and Dawn, and then, of course, we also see the Maggies, the Magnemites, and all just sleeping away. The Aeron line is actually being used to assist in the cleanup efforts of the giant metal sky fortress. And finally, we see Team Rocket trying to leave the glacier before they just get blasted, as the Team Rocket flying away has to happen at least once when they get blasted by Regigigas, who they disturb from its slumber once again. Overall, I'm not going to give it like a harsh rating or anything like that. I'll say like out of a 5. You know, again, this isn't me saying in terms of like, oh, it's a masterpiece or anything like that. It's incredible. It's well done. It's animation. It's, you know, I can't do it. The art is nice. The story was straightforward as you would expect it to be. And it's not like, you know, it's like saying, how do I put this? It's to criticize this would also to be like to say Goosebumps needs to be like the pinnacle of horror. You know what I mean? Instead, this is a nice movie to enjoy and to let yourself kind of think about what the possibilities are within Pokemon. I don't know, if you had to force me to rate it out of like 10, I'd say it's a solid 7. I'd say it's a solid 7. That's good. That's good. I enjoyed it. Would I watch it again? I'd probably put it on in the background. I don't know if I'd like actively watch it again. Unless it were to be to look at Giratina a little bit better and look at that world, because the Distortion world itself is incredible. All the little details that are around, all the islands, all the shifting environments, really, really built together just this ominous deity that Giratina is. And really, the movie showed that Giratina wasn't evil, or isn't being evil. Giratina is acting on instinct in order to preserve not only itself and its home, but in respect to preserving the actual real world that everyone else resides in. It is the protector of a world by itself, without sun, in a lonely land as it roams around. It doesn't know how to interact with anything else for the most part. All it knows is that it needs to protect its home. And anybody who sides or has assisted anybody that has harmed its home will in turn harm its home in its own eyes, seeing them as an enemy. It'll be fun to kind of see what the other movies have in store, whether that be like a more emotional draw or just those really cool cameos. I think my favorite moment in the entire thing, you should tell me what your favorite moments if you watch the movie on your own, which I highly recommend still. I think I got it for like $3 or $4 on YouTube just renting it, so it's not bad. Like $3 or $4 for, you know, an hour and a half. You pay what, maybe $20 if you go to the theaters for a movie. So, you know, yeah, it's nice. A nice hour, 30 minutes. And you know, say your favorite part. I have to admit, my favorite part flat out goes to Regigigas reveal. That was the coolest moment. I wasn't expecting to see Regigigas here. Was it in any of the promotional posters? Was that a thing? It probably was, and I might be a little stupid. With that then, thank you as always to the members of the channel. As you can see, their names are scrolling on the credits. If you want to see your name as part of the credits, become a member of the channel on YouTube or Patreon. And it's as little as $3 if you so wish, as I am ramping up production and what I can release, as you can see here. Outside of that then, as always, thank you so much for watching. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Don't do anything I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I'll see you next time. Bye!